The outputs of a project should be defined at the planning stage, including any conditions that will be required for a smooth transfer. Each outcome should be formally handed over to the sponsor, who should confirm their delivery, that is, sign off, so that there is no dispute about whether outcomes have been completed. A closure list is likely to have sections to include the following groups of tasks, but each project will have different features to consider. Below is a list of suggested areas that can be considered. Not all handovers are at the completion of a project. In some projects, there might be several different types of handover which happen at different stages. If the project involves preparation and handover of a physical object, there may be a number of contributing components and possibly subcontracted elements. The project plan should have identified the various elements and the details of handover arrangements for each stage, if there is a sequence of tasks. The schedule will have identified the sequence in which tasks need to be completed. Hopefully, the risk register will have identified the risks associated with each handover, and a contingency plan will have been made for each major risk. Handovers should be identified as key stages on the Gantt chart. The acceptance criteria for hard projects, where the output is highly specific, may be fairly straightforward. These arrangements can be quite similar to common routine arrangements for confirming receipt of items by matching delivery notes with order forms. However, for the handover of a soft project, the acceptance criteria may be more problematic. The handover phase in projects of this kind may include activities and processes that enable the project sponsor to take over responsibility on a long-term basis. A definition of completion for this type of project might be achieving the active, successful management of the activity by the project's owners, users, or stakeholders, and withdrawal of the project team. Any support that will be required as part of the project completion should be planned, and the person responsible for providing it should be identified. It is important to have clear agreement about how the project itself will be concluded and handed over, even if there is a separate agreement about future support or training related to the outcome. Once a handover process has been agreed, a meeting of the project team to prepare for the handover should be arranged. This is the time to make sure you haven't forgotten anything that might lead your sponsor to withhold acceptance. It is helpful to draw up a list of outstanding tasks and to make sure that someone is responsible for doing each of them within a specified timescale. These might include minor tasks from early stages of the project which were not critical to progress and have been left on one side. As we have seen, a communications matrix is a way of noting who needs to be consulted and at what stage. It can also be useful at the handover stage. It can be a formal chart or rough notes, but its purpose is to help minimize the problems that arise when people feel they have not been consulted. The table below shows an example. You can deliver the outcomes agreed with a minimum of fuss or celebration, or you can deliver with style. A project that is delivered so that it meets the outcome requirements exactly and is on time and within the budget allowed will usually be well received. However, each delivery offers an opportunity to please the client by making the presentation part of the successful outcome. Presentation is about creating an impression. Handover events can create a favorable or unfavorable impression. The successful completion of a project is the purpose of the whole thing, but somehow the final stages can often be an anticlimax. The conclusion can be planned as a celebration to take place whilst the project team is still intact. Planning to celebrate success demonstrates confidence in the project and can be indicated as a milestone from the early stages of the plan. Planning celebratory events can be the focus of successful project completion and can be a motivating factor for the team and can help to keep up momentum in the later stages of a long project. It can contribute to keeping the morale of the team high. As handovers can take place at many stages, not just the concluding stage of a project, handover is not, in itself, completion of the project. If the project's objectives were clearly set out, the completion or acceptance criteria should flow logically from them. Such criteria might include the following points below. The closing stages of a project need as much, if not more, attention as the early stages. Many of the final tasks in a project may seem rather tedious housekeeping once the project's main purpose has been achieved. Nevertheless, there are a number of actions that must be taken to close the project and ensure that any necessary maintenance arrangements have been made. Closing a project can be quite an emotional experience for team members who have worked together for some time, particularly if close bonds have developed. The manager of a project has some obligations to staff who have worked for some time on it. Build into the plan a closure interview with each member of staff so that their contribution can be formally recognized and recorded. Staff may need help to recognize the skills and experience that they have gained and how these have been evidenced in their contribution and achievements. The project is not finished until the closure has been managed, and planning well in advance can reduce the stress of the final stages. A structured debriefing process can be helpful to include stakeholders as well as all the project team. This may take the form of a series of meetings which draw conclusions about overall project performance and constraints, identify and review any new ways of working that were developed, and consider what could have been done differently. The closure meeting is a time for celebrating successful completion. It could have a similar format to the launch meeting and involve many of the same people. It might include reviewing the outputs or outcomes, confirming the arrangements for any follow-up work, thanking the team, the sponsors, and the stakeholders for their support, presenting the completion report for approval and sign-off. Projects do not always go according to plan. If problems develop during the closure period, there are particular difficulties. One of the common problem is the project drift. Project drift is a common problem when one project leads into another without a clear break, or when extra tasks which were not identified at the beginning are added to a project. If possible, significant changes of the latter kind should be treated separately as a follow-on project. Otherwise, they may not be properly resourced, and this can have adverse consequences for motivation of the project team. However, the drift can also cause the situation not only to be unresolved but also to have the prospect of continuing indefinitely, and this may be impossible to carry out the normal closure activities. A project is often shaped through discussion among those developing the vision and direction of the project. They may agree in general terms about what is to be achieved, but have to make a number of choices before deciding how to proceed. It may be important to allow time for different views to be heard and considered, and for attitudes to change and hopefully converge. Many stakeholders may become involved in evaluation in the early stages of a project, in imagining what it might mean for them and how it might present advantages or disadvantages. The anticipated impact of the project can be usefully evaluated in the early stages to ensure that the investment of energy and resources can be expected to achieve the intended results. Evaluation during the planning stage is usually concerned with whether plans represent good value for money. It may be appropriate to evaluate inputs to the project to ensure that their quality and quantities are sufficient to achieve the objectives. Evaluation is significant because even when a tendering process is carried out with care to ensure that the contract results in a partnership that will be successful for everyone, it is impossible to predict all the potential risks. Some contingency sum might be agreed, but many contracts also incorporate a process for negotiating liability for additional costs when these arise unexpectedly. Risk is the chance of something occurring that has an adverse effect on the project. Many risks can be foreseen and identified. The main categories of risk has been summarized in the tabular form. At this stage, the project activities are monitored to determine how their timing, quality, and cost match the plan. The results of this monitoring are reviewed to see whether the plan needs to be modified. New environmental conditions may indicate the need to change the organization's strategic direction. It might be necessary, in that case, to realign the project so that the outcomes relate to the new direction. In some cases, it may be necessary to abort the project if it is no longer appropriate or likely to make a useful contribution. Incorporating this kind of evaluation as part of the project plan, that is, the formative evaluation, can considerably enhance the likelihood of achieving useful outcomes. If formative evaluation is to take place, it should be integral to the project's design. It can facilitate a more organic change process with testing and refining built in as the project progresses. However, formative evaluation can increase the complexity of a project because of the need to timetable an extra set of deadlines. It will also add new items to the risk log, particularly the risk of delays. If formative evaluation results in decisions to make significant changes to the project, it may lengthen the timescale, increase the budget, or necessitate additional quality measures. Different types of evaluation may take place at the end of a project. A common one is determining the extent to which the project outcomes have been achieved. This is often done in a meeting of the sponsor, key stakeholders, and project team leaders, and sometimes informed by reports from key perspectives. An evaluation of this nature may be the final stage of the project, and the main purpose might be to ensure that the project has met all of the contracted expectations and can be signed off as complete. A different type of evaluation may be a review of the process with the purpose of learning from experience. This is often done by comparing the project plan with what actually happened to identify all the variations that occurred in both processes and outcomes. The aim is to draw out how to avoid such variations in future projects, or how to plan more effectively for contingencies. Although monitoring takes place throughout a project, evaluation based on the information thus gained is likely to happen at the end of the project in a final summative evaluation which identifies the following. Some of the key questions to consider in carrying out an evaluation of the planning and implementation of a project are displayed as follows. Reviews and informal evaluations will often be sufficient, but sometimes a formal evaluation will be needed. A formal evaluation can be both time-consuming and expensive, and so must be carefully planned. There are many different ways of carrying out such an evaluation, and the process chosen will influence the attitudes of those involved and whether their response to the project is positive or negative. There are a number of decisions that have to be made in designing an evaluation, and these are as follows. All of these decisions relate to the overall purpose of the evaluation, and if each is considered as part of the design process, the answers will enable the process to be planned. Contingency plans indicate what to do if unplanned events occur. They can be as simple as formalizing and recording the thought processes when you ask, "What if?" and decide which options you would follow if the what-if situation happened. The key points in contingency planning can be summarized as follows. However, to deal with contingencies, practicing managers can do the following. In many projects, it can be difficult to make comparisons with anything similar. However, there may be quality standards that can be used for one or more of the outcomes, perhaps alongside different targets for timescales and resource use. Benchmarks are another possible source of comparative data. They have been established for many processes, and data are available from industry, sector, and professional support bodies. When planning what data to use in the evaluation, it is helpful to consider how the data will be analyzed. If you have set clear objectives, it should be possible to identify the data that are relevant to each issue. It can be very time-consuming to analyze data from interviews and observations, but if the purpose of the analysis is clear, then it is possible to focus only on the relevant material. You need to consider the audience and use language that they will understand, avoiding unfamiliar jargon. The evaluation report will often contain recommendations for further actions, and these may lead to new project ideas. Recommendations may relate to processes and procedures within the organization. The project manager of a staff development project ran a series of seminars for human resources colleagues to disseminate the lessons learned from the project. The key lessons identified are displayed below. Managing a project provides considerable opportunities for self-development, but these can be lost if you become too immersed in delivering the project to remember that you will move on to other work once it concludes. For many managers, taking responsibility for a project is a time-bounded task with clear objectives and a fixed budget. A project usually involves managing staff, finance, operations, and information across the boundaries of departments and functions, with complicated interactions and difficult situations. There is usually a strategic dimension in ensuring that the project continues to align with organizational objectives and directions. Thus, the project manager's overview of the project is similar to the chief executive's view of the whole organization. There is an opportunity to use the experience of managing a project to develop yourself for a more senior role and to demonstrate, through successful outcomes and evaluation, that you are prepared for such a role. You could also carry out a personal self-evaluation to contribute to your own development as a project manager. You can develop a list of questions to evaluate your own performance. The questions are displayed as follows. Some of these questions can be usefully asked from an early stage in the project to review the working relationships within the team. Other questions relate to the final outcomes, and answers will be colored by the extent to which the project is considered successful. Many of the questions will need to be adapted for use in a particular setting. Personal development can be evaluated in the same way as other factors. Firstly, you need to set targets against which to assess your success. Ask yourself, how shall I know that I have succeeded, and identify the most significant indicators. As the project proceeds, you can collect evidence relating to your personal achievements, as well as that relating to the project objectives. You may do this by compiling a portfolio of evidence which demonstrates your achievements against each objective that you have set yourself. Another way of keeping a record is a project journal in which to set down what you notice and learn as the project develops. It can be lonely managing a project, and it can be difficult to seek feedback about your own performance if the team are new and lack confidence, or if the situation requires you to take a strong lead. Consider asking a senior manager in your organization to act as your mentor for the duration of the project. This should not be someone who has a strong personal stake in the project, but someone who can help you learn from what happens as the process unfolds. You might find it helpful to draw up the framework of a personal development plan, indicating some targets for development and identifying how you will know that you have reached them. You might also want to collect evidence of your achievements to produce as you pursue new career options.